And the problem is that 95% of our reaction and response to stimuli is in the subconscious mind, which means it's automated. Like we're blinking, we're holding our breath, we're exhaling, we're holding our bladder. This stuff is all automated and it's done in the subconscious mind. So if you want to change your life, transform your life, break old habits, create new habits, you're going to have to go into your automated programming.
Chris, welcome to the Point of Impact. Glad to have you here.
Aaron, I'm excited to be part of this conversation.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've read the book, one of your books. You are prolific, experience. You've got very interesting career history from martial arts and Air Force and training afterwards and during to even inventor.
Yeah, it's been quite an interesting ride, a very diverse career. But at the end of the day, you know, I've always felt like my purpose here in this lifetime is to protect the innocent and to safeguard the helpless. And I've always believed that since even I was a child. So regardless of what my endeavors or my goals or my pursuits are, I always look at it through the lens of, does this help people? Does this protect people? Those that can't protect, themselves even. And that's just kind of the lens and the filter that I look at everything through. And whether it be a patent or a book or a keynote speech, I'm here to protect the innocent and safeguard the helpless, or to show them how to do it themselves.
I've noticed that a lot of service members, protectors, defenders, police, fire, a lot of them come from upbringings where they had to learn a little bit of grit. Maybe they didn't have that kind of protection, and they swore that they would become what they didn't have. You came from a similar background, didn't you?
Yeah, Alan Watts, who's a famous British philosopher who was very prolific back in the 70s. He's deceased now. But I was listening to something, a lecture on YouTube that he gave years ago. And he said that the people who, when they were growing up during their childhood, who were deprived of love and acceptance and attention, he said, typically as adults become the greatest caregivers and the greatest protectors. And I found that to be very interesting.
Well, that's one of those things my friend Eric Weinmeier calls the adversity advantage. And it's grit, resilience, having that, having the adversity to forge the person you become. And I know you talk about that in your latest book, the book on mindset. But you actually had a bit of a medical scare recently, where I guess your mindset played a part. What happened there?
Yeah, it was about 5 weeks ago, and I called my wife, and she was at work, and I was in the kitchen, and I said, "Hey, you need to get home. Something's not right." And I'd never had a seizure before. I didn't know what a seizure felt like, but I knew something wasn't right. So I'm glad I called her, because I had a seizure, and I went out like a light, and I wasn't breathing. And so she walked in, and saw me laying out on the floor, and she had to resuscitate me through CPR, and about broke a few of my ribs in the process. That saved my life, but got me breathing until the ambulance got here. But anyway, they got me to the hospital and did an MRI, and they found out that I had a golf ball sized tumor in my brain, non-cancerous. Thank God for that. But 6.5 hours of brain surgery, craniotomy later, they got it all out, and kind of had to learn to talk again, and had to learn to stand without the use of a cane. But lots happened in 5 weeks, and what they said was going to take 6 months to a year to recovery. I'm already back in the gym and doing cardio and lifting weights, and so just very grateful. But that could have ended differently.
Has anybody mentioned the irony there?
A few times, yeah.
The guy has mastered mindset almost taken out by his own brain.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they mentioned it all the time. The power, the power of the mind, either way.
And it's true. I mean, there's a lot about what you wrote about is in the narrative, what we tell ourselves. Yeah. How do we, so what is, I mean, when it comes to, that was a really literal, your brain acting against you, but how important is narrative to our mindset?
It's everything. And I think it even ties into what my definition of mindset is. If you were to walk into a leadership conference and ask the leaders in that room, let's just say there's 100 executive leaders in that room, men and women, and you were to say, hey, raise your hand if you believe that mindset is vital to your career success as a leader. Probably everyone in that room would raise their hand. There's very few people who don't understand the vital importance of mindset. But then, Aaron, if I were to say, okay, now raise your hand if you think you could stand up and to this room clearly articulate the difference between mindset, attitudes, and beliefs, you wouldn't get a lot of hands raised. Mindset is very misunderstood. We use the word often, but if you Google it, like what is mindset, you're going to get 100 different opinions. You're going to get a lot of different books. They all have a different idea about what mindset and mental toughness is. So I want to tell you what my definition of mindset is, so we can give it some context for the rest of our meaningful conversation. So from the moment we wake up in the morning until the time we go to bed, we are inundated with hundreds, if not more, of stimuli. There's stimulus after stimulus. So the moment the alarm clock goes off, let's say it goes off early because you're wanting to go to the gym and work out. Well, that alarm clock going off when you're still asleep, that's a stimulus. Well, that space that lives between the stimulus and the response, how you either respond or react to that stimulus, that is what I call mindset. And so when I talk about you need to master your mindset, what I'm really saying is you need to master the space that lives between the stimuli that is coming at you hundreds of times a day and how you either respond or react to it. And the problem is that 95% of our reaction and response to stimuli is in the subconscious mind, which means it's automated. It's automated. Like we're blinking, we're holding our breath, we're, exhaling, we're holding our bladder. This stuff is all automated and it's done in the subconscious mind. So if you want to change your life, transform your life, break old habits, create new habits, you're going to have to go into your automated programming. You're not going to do it in your analytical mind. You're not going to do it with self-motivation. You're not going to do it with willpower. You have got to go into the operating system, Aaron.
Mm-hmm. How very Frankel of you. What are these components of the self-image? We're going to break this mindset down into its base parts.
Well, the first part, which is the reason most of us don't have success making lasting change, is because we can't get past the first part. And that's the gatekeeper. So standing in front of or at the gate of the subconscious mind is this 7-foot bodyguard. Imagine he weighs about 400 pounds and he's solid muscle. And he's, medical terms, neurology would call him the critical faculty. But he's the mental firewall. He's the gatekeeper. But we're just going to call him Critical Carl. And Critical Carl, his number one job in life is to stand at the gate of the subconscious mind and to not let anybody in that is unfamiliar. He's not going to let any idea, any thought, any enthusiasm, motivation, inspiration. He doesn't care. Because if he doesn't understand it and recognize it, it's unfamiliar. And if it's unfamiliar, it becomes a threat. And not only is he not going to let you in to the subconscious mind where meaningful change happens, he also doesn't accept fake IDs. So, your positive self-talk ain't going to get you past critical Carl.
Mm-hmm. What happens when you're out of alignment with that self-image?
Well, what's out of alignment? I mean, is the ego out of alignment, or is the version of yourself that you want to become out of alignment? Because, if the version of yourself that you think you're becoming, that you want to become, your future best self, is that the one that's creating the friction? Or is that the one that's actually in harmony and alignment? But the one that's out of alignment is your current ego. So I think before you take your first step, you got to determine, is my current position out of alignment, or is my future trajectory out of alignment?
Well, if the bouncer doesn't let you in and there's some sort of friction, but maybe we don't know exactly. So,
well, maybe
you feel the friction.
He doesn't either like where you're at, or he doesn't like where you tell him you're going to go.
We know that something's out of alignment, and that the ego, our values, just that self image, that narrative, but isn't the first step acknowledgement, recognition? I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, acknowledgement and acceptance are always the very first step to any kind of meaningful or lasting change or the attainment of a goal. Nothing positive is going to happen in your life. Nothing without first, it starts with awareness, and that is you just being very honest about where you currently are. And maybe even going further and saying, and here's how I got here. And then acknowledgement. I mean, so it starts with acceptance and then acknowledgement. And then from there, it goes into ownership, because if you don't take ownership of, how you got here, where you're at and how you got here, then there's not a podcast or a coach that can help you.
Big craze the last, few years have been these personality tests. There's always been something that nags at me about these things. I've never really liked them much because they feel stagnant. They're like a Polaroid of a person rather than a identifier. What's one of the biggest pitfalls when looking at those things?
Well, they're dangerous. It's like that 19-year-old who goes to visit a palm reader, because her boyfriend just broke up with them, and they don't think they're ever going to find love. And they go to this palm reader, and the palm reader, tells them whatever. Well, the level of influence that information is going to have, for that $30 piece of advice that you just got from someone who knows nothing about you, but now all of a sudden they're going to give you this advice about love and relationships. It's going to have a lot of impact because you were very influential at that moment, or you wouldn't have stopped in and saw the palm reader and gave them the $30. So you're going to be very impressionable right now. And that information that this uninformed person is going to give you is going to have a lot more influence over you than it probably should. And I think this is one of the problems that we have with these, personality evaluations and all that. First of all, the fact that you think you need that, means that it's going to have a lot more impact on you than it probably normally would. It's different if, you're going to get a new job and your employer says, hey, as part of our hiring process, everybody has to do this assessment. Okay, well, I'll do your assessment, but it probably isn't. I'm not going to probably take it too seriously because it's not something I felt like I needed. And it's not something that I went out and sought after and paid for. So it won't have that much impact on me. I'll read your answers and I might get a kick out of a few of the things. Oh yeah, I would agree with that. Well, I probably wouldn't agree with that. But when you're out there and you think you need that validation, you need that, whatever, and you pay for that accountability, or not that accountability, you pay for that assessment. And now all of a sudden you're reading these tea leaves and you're taking them way too damn serious. And the problem is they start using the results of those tests as an excuse, for bad decisions or for procrastination or for being a little bit too dominant at the dinner table. Well, hey, it's not my fault. My personality test says that I'm a I'm a high D or whatever the hell that means. So I think, be careful with them and take them in stride.
It could be exactly the counterproductive evidence, like when people tell themselves, "Oh, I'm no good at math." Somebody said you should try this, and before we tell her we have an interview, and I answered the questions like I thought he wanted me to answer them, and when I told him my score, he's like, "Man, that was almost exactly like my score." Well,
yeah, it's like being on a first date with a supermodel. I mean, I'm going to answer these questions appropriately, accordingly. You can game the system. What would you do in this situation? Well, they're hiring me for project management, so I'm probably going to go with C.
Once we figure out we've got that acknowledgement, the acceptance, we know that we're out of alignment. We talk about mindset, and what was Dr. Dweck who wrote the book on mindset? Not the book on mindset, you wrote that, but mindset.
Carol Dweck
talks about mindset being either fixed or a growth mindset. Everybody wants the growth mindset. Nobody wants to admit that they're the fixed mindset, but of course it fluctuates. We switch back and forth, but you go a whole lot further. You talk about 3 types of mindsets, and mindset being, was it a bridge, a coach, and a
referee?
Referee. No, thank you. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, look, that mindset that I have, I can flip a switch, and I can switch to a different mindset very quickly. If I'm on a date with my wife and I've been married 30 years, and if we're out on a date and a beautiful evening and we're kind of in an outdoor mall type environment area, and we're eating on the balcony with the wind in our face, and it's just a beautiful night and great company and all of these things, and I'm in a certain mindset, and then all of a sudden some drunk stands up at the bar and starts slapping the waitress. Do you think I can find a different mindset? And he starts walking over toward me and my wife, and starts knocking tables over. Look, mindset is something that it's very powerful, but we can use it as an ally. We can use it as or we can use it as an accomplice. We can use it as an excuse. We can monetize it if we need to. So I think the most important thing to remember about mindset, you get to determine, do I want this? Is this going to be mindset my referee that says, "Hey, easy, Chris, don't take this too serious. Go sit back down," or is this going to be the coach, that says, "Hey, you probably need to get involved here. That little waitress over there is going to get hurt." So mindset, we should be able to navigate, in and out of the mindset that we need at that moment. And we should be able to do it very quickly. Mindset, this whole thing about growth or fixed mindset, which Dr. Dweck writes about in her book, I have both. And there's certain areas of my life that I'm very open-minded. And that's what to me, that's what I read. What she's really saying is you're either closed-minded or you're open-minded. Growth is open-minded, close is fixed. And so there are areas of my life I am very closed-minded, and I don't want somebody, for example, basically breathing down my back about what I need to be believing, for example, DEI. Okay. I have my own opinions on DEI, and I have friends that have different opinions about DEI, and I'm respectful of those opinions. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you want to try to change my opinions that I have formulated over, the course of my lifetime on DEI, I am going to have a very fixed mindset about what you have to say. I'm not going to be very open-minded about some of your thoughts about that. Now, if you want to talk to me about something completely different, if we chose a different topic, I'm going to be very open-minded about that. So we move back and forth throughout the course of a day. Talk about stimulus and response. Some stimulus, I'm going to be very fixed, closed-minded. And some I will be very open-minded, very growth-oriented. And we have the choice to move back and forth. But what Carol Dweck says in her book is if we have a fixed mindset, there will be no growth. And she's right. But I will tell you, there are some things that I don't want growth. Like, I don't want to hear about why you think that I need to be paying someone's way who snuck across the border. I don't think I should be paying their way. I don't think I should be putting them in hotels. I don't think I should be buying them meals. And I am going to be very fixed on that opinion. And I don't need to be growth mindset over there. So I think sometimes having a fixed mindset is what makes us who we are. And we need to stand our ground.
Would the fixed mindset be closer in relation to what do you call the mission oriented mindset, where it's process?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then what about there's the agency mindset?
Yeah. So that the agency is, look, I know who I am. And I've got these lofty goals that I've set in front of me, and they're very ambitious, and I'm probably going to get my ass kicked, somewhere between here, where I am, and over here, this impossible goal I set for myself. I'm probably going to get my ass kicked a few times, but no matter what happens, it's not going to change who I am, and it's not going to change what I see when I look in the mirror. My value and my worth are fixed. That's agency mindset. I'm going to go after that goal. Like I'm going to go for broke here. I'm swinging till the whistle blows. I mean, I'm either going to cross that finish line or it's going to kill me. Like I'm either going to make a way or find a way, but no matter what happens, it's going to be a bruise, not a tattoo.
Where did you develop this resilience? The mindset that's more, I would say, agency focused. I mean, there's definitely a whole lot of mission focused mindset there.
I developed it out of insecurity. I developed it out of being a grown ass man. Being a scared little boy in a grown ass man's body. I was the baddest guy in the room, the toughest guy in the room. I was the guy who, if I wanted to clear the room, I could. I had the skills and the ability to do that. But deep down inside, I was insecure. And what I really was after was love, acceptance, and the praise of man. And, at some point in time, one of us had to find the other one out, So, I came across as I just had all this, alpha male with a lot of confidence and bravado, but really I was just a scared little boy, just trying to, get somebody to look at me and give me a little bit of affirmation. And I was in my 20s and, and I just, one day just had to square up with myself and look in the mirror and square myself in the eye and say, hey, let's just call it what it is. You're scared to death. And, the praise of man is not, it's not doing it. The accolades, it's not doing it. It's not cutting it. You're going to have to come to a point in your life, Chris, to where you look in the mirror and you like what you see. And it doesn't matter what anybody else. There just came that point to where I didn't give a shit what anybody thought anymore. And I didn't need their approval. And I was going to swing for the fence and I was going to do the things that I wanted to do. And if I failed, I failed. And I was going to get up and just keep going for it. And I didn't really care what anybody thought. And that was my day of liberation. That was my day of freedom. And it was the day that I just, I love my friends and my family and I respect them. And I hope I earn their approval, but I just came to a point where I no longer needed it.
You mentioned being that little boy, and there were a couple of stories or glimpses of you as a child. One was being homeless. It was better than being in the foster homes, which you moved around, I suppose, and digging into the dumpsters and that come to Jesus moment when you were eating a bag of donuts that you found in the trash. What was that realization? What was that? You made a promise to yourself.
That was a real turning point in my life. That was one of those moments in my life where I made a soul binding tie. And that's what I call them. I don't know what they're really called, but it's where basically we look up into the heavens and we shake our fist at God. And, or we, shake our fist at our abuser, whatever. And we basically make a declaration that I will never again, or from this point forward. And that was just one of those soul binding tie moments of truth in my life. And I don't remember my exact age, but I was probably around 12 years old. And I lived with a lot of different foster families. And I was homeless by choice, at this for this current story. So, the foster homes, they were hit or miss. I was I was in the Child Protective Services program, and some of these people truly loved kids and wanted to help, and some of these people just wanted to get a check every month, and they just wanted the check. And hey, if I can prove to Child Protective Services that I've got enough beds and I can house 3 more kids, and each kid produces this much money a month, and then so be it, I'll do it. And so growing up in Ohio, the winters are brutal. They're just brutal. And, and so if the weather, if we were coming into spring or summer, I would leave. I would run away from the foster home. And I would just go ahead and live on the streets and sleep under bridges and eat out of dumpsters. Because, in the foster homes, I didn't want to be in a situation to where I really didn't feel like I was wanted. And I was just a burden on somebody, or they were just having me there because they wanted to get money from the government. I didn't want to be in that situation. And I also especially wasn't going to live with a family if I thought they were going to be emotionally or physically abusive. And so if I ran away and was homeless, it was my choice to be homeless. And then all of a sudden winter was coming, and I'd go borrow a dime, bum, a dime as a little kid. I just asked some stranger on the street there in Dayton, Ohio, could I have a dime? And I'd go over to the payphone, and I had my social worker's number memorized, and I would just dial the number and say, come get me. I'm at the corner of 3rd Street and whatever. And they would come get me, and back into the system I went. But, I was 12 years old, and I found a bag of donuts in the trash, in the dumpster, and I was eating them, and I was all excited and proud of myself for this, wonderful find. What 12-year-old kid doesn't love, donuts? And especially when you don't have an adult standing over you saying you can only have one or you can only have 2. No, I had the whole damn bag, and I could eat them all and get sick if I wanted to. But I just remember the fact that I got disgusted with myself, Aaron. I mean, I was disgusted with myself that I considered this a victory. Like, what the hell are you smiling about, dumbass? Like, you're eating food from a dumpster and you think this is okay? And, and I just remember like throwing the donuts back in the dumpster, and I'm like, I'm worth more than this. And my life is going to equal more than this. And, I'm going to do, it was that moment that I'm like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to break the chains of poverty. And although I have been victimized many times in my life, that was the moment that I stood up and said, I will never be a victim. Being victimized was out of my control, but choosing whether or not I was going to be a victim was completely within my control. And I put the donuts back in the trash, and I rose to my feet. I think that was the moment that a boy stood up as a man.
That takes a lot of determination, but making the decision alone isn't enough.
Well, living a life as a loser in poverty, that takes a lot of determination too. I mean, someone standing on the corner begging for money all day long so they can get high at 10 o'clock tonight. That's determination.
I suppose that's, I guess, hard work, or I don't know.
Look, I live in Fort Worth, Texas, and the summers are brutal. And I drive, there's a couple of intersections here to where, at that intersection at 5 o'clock, and it's 110 degrees out. And, that person's going to be standing at that corner right there begging for money. And, and they're tweaking. I mean, they're going to get that money and they're going to go buy drugs. I mean, it's just all over them. And I'm sitting here going, man, you're standing out here in 110 degree heat, or sitting on that bucket that you brought out here. And you got the little sign that you made, God bless, we'll work for food, whatever. And I'm sitting here going, man, you're working harder than I did today. Like, you're determined. You're not leaving that corner, no matter how hot it gets, no matter how dehydrated you get. You're not leaving this corner until you have enough money to meet your desired outcome tonight. And that's determination.
Well, that other story, another story you shared was about as in your childhood about another intersection of determination and in drive was when you were first introduced to martial arts, and you didn't know how to defend yourself. You just go outside, and the neighborhood kids would attack you.
They beat the shit out of me. Call it what it is. I was the only white kid in the projects. No, that's not true. There was one other white kid in the kid, and we were the only whites. We were the minorities, and everybody else that lived in the projects that we lived in, it was government assistance, and we were the only two white boys. And when we walked outside, man, it was game afoot. I mean, you sprinted, you ran everywhere you went because, they caught you, they threw you to the ground, and they kicked your ass. And that was every day. And I don't, I don't hold any grudges. I'm not angry about any of it. It changed my life. I'm very grateful for a lot of it. And I believe that it made me a better human being. So I'm not embittered by any of it. And I think a lot of the reasons, that they beat me was, they didn't know any better. They had biases. They had attitudes that they learned or that they learned from adults, and they didn't know any better. And they thought that I was a threat, and they physically hurt me. But one day, there was a church that was nearby, and I don't remember the denomination. I don't think that's important, but there was a church that was in walking distance of the projects I lived in. And there was a pastor there, and he was a martial arts black belt. And he knew that the majority of the kids that lived in the government housing I lived in, he knew that most of us didn't have fathers or father figures. And so he worked it out with the not apartment complex, but the projects. They looked like apartments, but he worked it out to where he could come by on certain days of the week, and they let him use the rec center, the recreation center, and he was going to teach us kids martial arts, and they agreed. And he came and got my first martial arts lessons on a Saturday morning, and it didn't have to pay for it, which was good because I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And that was my first, and I was 10 years old, and I was good at it. I had a gift, and I didn't think I had a gift. I didn't think I was good at anything, and I had a real gift for it. And it ended up becoming my career. I mean, I traveled the world, for 25 years as a private contractor, teaching elite special forces, tier 1 special forces in close quarters combat. That all began because that good-hearted man decided to come over to the government housing that I lived in and give some free martial arts lessons, teach us kids a little bit of self-worth, self-value, self-respect, self-discipline. And as a result, it's led to, me traveling the world and dining with kings and 4-star generals and meeting with some of the most elite soldiers in the world. Why? Because this good-hearted man decided to come into my neighborhood and throw down the rope. And I wish I knew his name. I'd send him a ham and a bottle of bourbon every year. But even though I don't remember his name, I remember him in my heart.
That because you were the only, or almost the only white boy in the neighborhood, were you readily accepted into the that first class?
Oh no, they most certainly did not want me there, and they made a big deal out of it, and they basically let the instructor know that if I was in that class, that they were all going to leave. And he made me go stand outside, and he gave me some speech about, the greater good. I'm here for the collective group. And there was a lot of boys that showed up, and they made it very clear that they were going to just do nothing but give him fits, and they weren't going to participate. They weren't going to listen as long as I was in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so he told me, I'm sorry, Chris, but you're going to have to leave. And, the greater good. I didn't even own a pair of socks. I mean, and it's freezing outside. I didn't have a coat, and I'm just standing outside, in my Kmart blue light special tennis shoes and my tough skin jeans that I got from the, Salvation Army. And, and I'm just standing out there in the freezing cold looking through the window, but he did let me look through the window and practice. And, weeks went by, and he finally realized, man, this kid's working harder than the kids that are in here in the heat. And he finally just said, you know what? I don't care what they think. We're bringing this kid in. I mean, I just showed enough grit, grind, and determination, and he let me in. And those kids realized very quickly that I had a talent. I had a gift, not to mention the fact that they learned something and they didn't do it again until next Saturday morning. The instructor taught me something. I went home and practiced it 10,000 times. And so those kids learned very quickly that, they put their hands on me, I was going to hit back, and I knew how to hit back. And I became very proficient very quickly. My gift basically shined through, and it got to where these kids quit chasing me, and they started respecting me. And I learned very quickly the power of being dangerous.
You found a way out. Where were you, Dayton?
Dayton, Ohio, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Akron. Go Bucks. But yeah, I know about the Ohio winters.
The smell of burning rubber.
I spent a few semesters at Bowling Green, but not all of them. Hence the military. When did you find the military?
So I was in high school, and for my 18th birthday, which was in January, I didn't graduate high school till May, but my senior year. But my 18th birthday, it's January. I'm still in high school, and my gift to myself was I went and enlisted, and with the United States Air Force, raised my right hand and swore the oath. And and that summer, I had my orders to go to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. And, so I spent most of my senior year knowing, what my ship date was to go to the military. And, and the military in a lot of ways saved my life. The reason I chose the Air Force was because my number one objective was to not be poor. And I had this high school guidance counselor, and she was just the most precious person and really cared about us. And I met with her, and I said, I just don't want to be poor. I said, what can I do in the military that is going to give me the greatest pathway to breaking the chains of poverty? And she said, I don't know. Let me do some research and I'll get back with you. And back then, we didn't have the internet. You had to go to like Encyclopedia Britannica or go to the library and look at microfiche or something. But she did the work, and she said, Chris, commercial airline mechanic. That is the highest paying job. If you want to go to serve in the military for 4 years and you're probably not going to get a college degree, she goes, if you can come out with the experience or the licenses or the certificates for heavy jet, not fighter jets, but like find the biggest airplane you can and something that, resembles commercial aircraft. And she said, and, go to night school while you're in and, get your airframe and power plant license. And when you get out, she said, have your airframe and power plant licenses. And she said, and have experience working on heavy jet aircraft. The bigger the airplane, the better. And she goes, and you'll be able to go be an aircraft mechanic, an A&P mechanic for the airlines. And she said, that is the highest paying job I can find for someone who wants to go serve in the military for 4 years, not have a college degree, and get out and make good money and break the chains of poverty. And that's exactly what I did. And I went in as a B-52 bomber crew chief. And at night, I went to night school to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and got my airframe and power plant license. And she was right. And when I got out, I ended up becoming an airframe and power plant mechanic for American Airlines. And it paid great. I had more money and I knew what to do with. I never had so much money in my life. And so God bless that woman.
That counselor is incredible. I remember my school counselor just read the aptitude test that I'd taken, and I scored a moderate, like average across the board. I would do okay anywhere, not excel in anything. But that you had the drive, the determination early, and you were talking about the neighborhood kids just beating the crap out of you. A lot of people will stay down in that fetal position and just take it for their whole lives. Why do some people just stay stuck in their position? Stay stuck in that situation where others they pull themselves out like you do.
Perspective. It all comes down to perspective. Look, my two sisters. So when I was 10, my sisters were 11 and 12, and both of them followed my mother's heroin addiction lifestyle. So, and both of them are dead now. But they had horrible lives, in and out of prison, lots of broken marriages, kids from multiple different husbands. And, but God bless them. They wrestled with the same demons my mother did. And, but their lives just turned out horrible, and they're both deceased now. But if you were to look at my two sisters, so I was 10 when my mother went to prison. They were 11 and 12. If you were to look at them before, when they were still alive, and say, how'd your lives turn out just so horribly? They would have said, well, because my mother was a drug addict. If the same person turned and looked at me, Aaron, and said, how'd your life turn out so wonderfully? Because I have had a wonderful life. I'd say, well, that's easy. My mother was a drug addict. We grew up in the exact same circumstances. Same point in time, same neighborhood. Everything was exactly the same. I mean, we were both, my sisters and I were shooting my mother up with heroin as little kids because she couldn't find a vein. The only difference between my sisters and me is they chose to make that their excuse for failure, and I chose to use that as my excuse for why I am successful. They chose the lens of debt. Someone owes me something. Someone has taken from me. Someone has deprived me, and I chose the lens of gratitude. Because of this experience, I don't know how in the hell you're going to compete with me as an adult, because I have such an advantage now.
You mentioned excuses. And where does those excuses, the negative ego, when I know, not in the true sense of, itself, but pride, false pride. And that entitlement, where does that come from?
Man, that's a really good question. I think excuses, blame, they're all in the same category. Refusal, closed-mindedness, refusal to, accept any kind of feedback. I think all of that, in my opinion, and I'm not a psychologist, but I think all of that is rooted in the id ego, the bad part of the ego, the ID ego, not the super ego, but the id ego. And the id ego, which a lot of it we've learned, from Sigmund Freud's work as a psychologist. I don't believe in everything that he taught, but I do think that he did have some really good nuggets. But he describes the id ego as, a lot of people get it wrong. They say, that our good ego, is like the little angel on our shoulder, and the id ego is like the little devil on our shoulder. And that is not how Sigmund Freud identified the id ego at all. And I'll give you an example, like, that's probably closer to what he was trying to explain. The id ego is like, imagine walking into Walmart and you're walking down the toy aisle, and there's this 3-year-old laying in the middle of the toy aisle, screaming, laying on the ground, stomping and throwing its fist, having a tantrum because mom or dad won't buy a toy that's on that aisle. And that kid is screaming, like, to the point to where, like, everyone in Walmart is walking over to that aisle to see what the hell's going on. That's your id ego. It's not the little devil on your shoulder saying you can't do it. It's the 3-year-old in the middle of the toy aisle laying down and having a tantrum and screaming.
How important is like the environment? Because I know you don't just make a decision and all of a sudden you're out of the slums. You're not away from the influence of your sisters immediately, right? Your mother. And how important is drawing boundaries?
Well, I think that the deeper question, because that is the right question and it's of the most vital importance. But when you talk about boundaries and environment, what you really have to talk about is, are you willing to live in isolation? Because when you make a decision that you're going to improve your environment and you're going to establish and maintain some boundaries to do so, what you're really saying is, I'm willing to start all over from scratch at being alone. I'm going to say bye. Because look, the relationships you have in your life are conducive to the environment. I mean, so if you're going to change your environment, which you can only do by setting and maintaining boundaries, what you're really saying is, I'm going to have to kick some people out of my damn life. Are you ready to be alone? Not forever, but you're going to have to create a new environment from scratch. And loneliness sucks. So are you willing to go through your 40 days in the desert? Because if you're not, might as well eat, drink, and be merry, because this is as good as it's going to get.
Mm-hmm. You drew a pretty tough boundary with your sister, who, as an adult, also, continued that legacy, that cycle from your mom of drug abuse. And
one of my sisters, Kim.
It was a tough outcome.
Yeah, to this day, and I'm not a guy that walks around with regret. I don't, look, I try to extract the lesson, learn from the lesson, and move on. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, but this is probably the closest thing I have to a regret. And it was my sister, Kim, and, God rest her soul. But, the only time Kim ever called me was when she wanted money. And the only time she ever wanted money was when she wanted to buy drugs. But she would always have some fantastic story, car broke down, her kid's sick, it was always something that really tugged on my heartstrings. And it was always something that was laced with half truths. Was your car broke down and you couldn't get your kid to school? Yeah, it was. But was that what you were going to use the money for? No, it wasn't. So there were always a lot of half truths. And I remember once she reached out to me and she needed a couple $1,000s. It wasn't a couple $100, a couple $1,000, a lot of money. And she needed it because she had to go get some kind of test for her kidneys. She was feeling really sick and she had to get some kind of a diagnostic test. And I didn't tell her no. I had the money and I didn't tell her no. What I did tell her, though, was to have the clinic or, the doctor's office, whoever was going to be doing the test, to reach out to me directly, and I would pay them directly. And, they could fax me the bill. They could mail me the bill. I could do a credit card over the phone, but I was going to pay them, not her. And that completely broke relationship with us. She never spoke to me again. And she, because what the hell, you son of a bitch, you don't trust me? Well, no, I don't trust you, but I love you. And it turns out that was one of the few times that she was telling the truth. And, she did need that money for that diagnostic test. And turns out that she ended up dying not too much longer after that. She had cancerous tumors all over her kidneys and ended up dying as a result. And, but I didn't get invited to the funeral. She made it very clear, to her kids that she didn't want me even, they didn't even inform me that she died. I mean, someone read it, the obituary in the paper and texted me, "Hey, did you know your sister just died?" And I bought a last minute airfare, to go to Dayton to be at the funeral. And I wasn't even wanted there. They didn't want me to know she was dead. They didn't want me at the funeral. She gave explicit instructions to her kids. I don't want that son of a bitch anywhere near me. Because he didn't give me the couple $1,000s. And, but the bottom line was, it was one time that she was telling me the truth, but, and I didn't deny her the money. I just said, we're going to do it through a way to where, I make sure the money's going to the right people, and it's going to be used accordingly. But to this day, look, that still breaks my heart, still tugs at my heart. But I had to set a boundary, a hard boundary, and the cost of that boundary was very high. Still is to this day. I missed my set. Look, I would have done nothing. There's really not much I wouldn't have done to been able to be by her bedside, and just tell her I love you one last time. She was very dear to me. And I was deprived that opportunity because of the misunderstanding between, her, what she thought happened, what she communicated to her kids and what they thought happened. And from her kids' perspective, I was this, wealthy uncle living thousands of miles away who could have helped save mom and wouldn't, so I get it. Everybody had their own version of the story. But the bottom line was, because of all of the misunderstandings and me setting these firm boundaries and standing to these boundaries, at the end of the day, I didn't get to, say goodbye and kiss my beautiful sister one last time and tell her I loved her. So, but sometimes that's the cost of setting boundaries, Aaron.
Well, the whole thing is tragic, but it's not just the boundary. It was the whole story. And even to the end, and like you mentioned earlier, it was about ownership and owning the story. But to the end, she was placing blame and making those excuses. It was out of her control, right? She'd blamed you and cut you out of the funeral, the family, and all of that. Instead of, she was hurt and offended, or was it? It wasn't her fault, and it was, so that's unfortunate that it turned out that way. But
Aaron, I have a hard, fast rule. So I do executive coaching and keynote speaking and things like that. As an executive coach, I'm not cheap. I'm like, if you look at, you can get a guy for this much or a gal for this much an hour, this much an hour, this much an hour. I'm the one that's this much an hour. I'm very expensive, and I'm pretty strict on who I take as a client. And so anytime I'm considering, like we're going through this evaluation process, like a discovery call, 30-minute free discovery call to determine if I'm going to be your kind of executive coach. I turn more people down than I work with. And, but I will tell you that I always ask a couple leading questions. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to determine is, are they going to take ownership for how they got to where they're at? And if I don't see them taking full ownership, look, I'm clear. You're hiring a coach because of where you want to go. I get it, right? If you don't know where you want to go, don't hire a coach, because nobody can give you directions. If you don't, hey, can you give me directions? Yeah. To where? Well, I'm not real sure. Well, no, I can't. So you got to know where your starting point is, and you got to know where you want to go. And so what I always determine on that 30-minute discovery call is, okay, so where are you currently and where do you want to go? And one of the things that I ask is, okay, well, how did you get here? And what I'm really doing is trying to find if they're going to take ownership. And if I can't like clearly point to them taking ownership, I just look at them and I say, look, I'm not your guy. I can't work with somebody, because if you aren't taking ownership for how you got to where you're at, I don't know who can help you. I know I can't. And I certainly don't even know who to recommend to you. It all begins with ownership.
There's so much more we haven't covered in this book and your previous books, and a whole lot more about you that we weren't able to cover, but we're getting long on time. So I think it's a good place to segue into the countdown to impact, a final segment. This is 3 books, 2 quotes, and 1 person who have all made an impact in your life.
For the books, I really love Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. That book really meant a lot to me. And look, I'll give you the key takeaway, and I don't care if you're in leadership, if you're in sales, but the theme of that book is this: don't criticize people. Like, nothing good comes from it ever. And I don't care what your intent is. That's my biggest takeaway from that is it's hundreds of pages of why criticizing others is just never a good idea, and how it will always backfire one way or the other. It burns bridges. So that's a book I would definitely highly recommend. Another book that very meaningful to me. I love anything written by Stephen Pressfield, and, he's a Marine, and he's just a phenomenal writer. And, but he's written some books that have just had a really deep, and they're easy reads. But like The War of Art, Move Your Ass, things like that. So anything Stephen Pressfield, I'm a really big fan of. And I'm a really big fan of the Book of Proverbs. The Book of wisdom it's rare these days. You got all these self-help experts and influencers, and, we judge their success by how many followers and likes and comments they have, which is all a bunch of bullshit. At the end of the day, I'm going to measure the results by the lives that you've impacted, not by the number of followers you have or subscribers. And, but the book of Proverbs is just wisdom. I mean, it's wisdom. And I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care if you're a plumber. I don't care if you're a soldier. I mean, but it tells you, it talks about money. It talks about not, running around on your spouse. It talks about being a faithful friend, even when it hurts. I mean, it's just all the good stuff, and it's applicable to every area of life. And then as far as a couple of quotes, one of my favorite quotes is, Alan Watts, British philosopher. He's been dead for a while now, but, British philosopher back in the 70s was kind of his heyday, but he said, you are under no obligation to be the same version of yourself you were 5 minutes ago. Just grow the hell up, keep changing, never stop evolving. And then another quote by Carl Jung, famous, psychologist. And, but Carl Jung said, look, until you can make your subconscious mind conscious, until you become aware of what's going on in your subconscious mind, he said, it will direct your life. It will control your life, and you will blame it on fate.
Two good ones. And one person who's made an impact in your life.
General Joe Votel has certainly made a tremendous impact in my life. He's the 4-star general who was over SOCOM and over JSOC. He was also over CENTCOM. He was over several major commands. But, you meet that leader that just, they walk in the room, man, they just walk in the room, and everybody just changes their posture, their demeanor. They put their phones down. They close their laptops, not because you told them to, because they know that something special has just walked in the room, and, it's like John Wayne just walked in, and it's this expert power. But, I've had the privilege of being on a couple of work trips with General Votel, and, like if I texted him right now, he would text me back within 5 minutes, hey, can't talk right now, but can I call you later? It's always been accessible to me, which blows me away that, a man with this much agency and gravitas. And I mean, the guys on Fox News all the time, who would just take the time to stop what he's doing and text me back. That's the kind of leader, man, I'll take the hill for. I'll take the hill for him. No questions asked.
Yeah, he even got a spot in your book too. This is the kind of person that commands a room, magnetism, natural inherent authority,
energy.
I've known a few people like that. Just want to be around them and please a person like that. And work with them. That's the kind of person others strive to be. Well, final two questions. One is, where can people find out more about you?
You can either go to thewarriormaker.com, or you can just Google The Warrior Maker. If you Google The Warrior Maker, look, if you Google Chris Harris, there's like 3,000 famous Chris Harrises out there. I'm not one of them. But if you Google The Warrior Maker, I pretty much own that space. So either Google The Warrior Maker or just go to thewarriormaker.com.
And what's your definition of living a life of impact?
Look, I just want to look at the people that are around you, and, because I can look at you, and I mean, that'll tell me so much. But, when I look at the people around you and how they look at you, how they speak to you, how they listen to you, how they love you, how they treat you, that tells me everything I need to know. Like, look, if I want to know what kind of husband a man is, I don't want him to tell me what kind of husband he is. All I got to do is take a look at the smile on his wife's face. And, that tells me everything I need to know. I just got to look at the way, his or her kids treat them, when they walk in the room. That tells me the kind of parent you are. I'll learn what kind of husband you are or what kind of wife you are by your spouse. I'll learn what kind of parent you are by your kids. And so, if you're a person of impact, if you're out there really throwing down the rope, I'll see it from the people that you've impacted, not from your testimonials on your website.
Well, Chris, thank you again for coming and sharing your experience, your expertise. And again, I really appreciated the book.
Thank you. This has been a real joy and pleasure. You know, I've done a lot of podcasts. I think probably since January 1st, I've done well over 20 podcast interviews or something like that. And kind of just talking about my book and mindset and things like that. And I'm kind of rounding off now. Like I'm getting done with that season of promoting my book, on podcasts. So this is one of my final, and I couldn't think of a better way to end it than with me getting to have a conversation, with you, Aaron. And this is one that I was just most excited about because, just reading your story and, and watching some of the stuff that's out there about you, on social media and listening to some of your other podcast interviews. And I'm like, man, this is a guy who walks the walk. This is a guy who just, he's not out there talking about it. This is a guy who has done it and who keeps doing it. And, you're the real deal. And I'm just so glad that after this little, 3-month, 4-month podcast tour that I get to end it, with Aaron Hale. I mean, this is like, you're just like one of my heroes of what we're doing here. I mean, you walk it, man, you live it, you do it, you are it. So, it's been an honor, sir.
Oh, go on. You're going to make me blush. Thank you very much. Take care.
All right. Strength and honor.